Hello there everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to my first chatty video in what feels like absolutely forever. I'm really excited to film this, but there are two things I want to mention before I begin. Number one, I'm in my pyjamas and have a drink. I wanted to do this all professionally in my uniform, have a proper setup, but I'm not feeling 100% today, so I thought we'd have a more relaxed vibe for this video. And number two, I am filming this quite late on in the evening, so if the lighting changes throughout, then please excuse that. There's really not too much I can do about it, although I have tried to use my ring light. But getting into the video, you may have seen my two recent vlogs. The first one was my last week working as a mental health support worker in a forensic inpatient hospital, and the second one was my first week working in the community mental health team. That's because over the last few weeks I've been in the transition of changing jobs, but I thought it would be good to talk a little bit more about my experience in the hospital setting, because a lot of you may be here through watching my journey as a psychology student, you may be here because you're a psychology graduate like myself, or you may just be interested in working in mental health settings. And I never knew much about inpatient settings before I worked in them, and now that I do, I thought I would share my wisdom. Two little warnings before I begin. The first one is that obviously I'm going to be speaking about things that relate to an inpatient setting in this video. That may include restraint, self-harm, thoughts of suicide, and so if you're not in the right headspace to watch this, then please click off it right now, because I wouldn't want to distress anybody. It's always going to be here, so you can come back at a later time and watch the video. The second thing is that during this video I'm speaking purely based on my own experience, so everything is either my opinion or based on my experience working in that setting. Other people may have different thoughts and opinions, and that's fine, but as I said, I wanted to share my journey and my experience doing so. So let's get started, shall we? I've got a massive list on my phone of things that I wanted to go through because I don't want to miss anything off, but we'll start on the first section, which is where did I work, and this is just going to be a very brief explanation in case you're completely new to this terminology. I don't want to lose anybody before I even begin. So I worked in a forensic inpatient hospital. An inpatient hospital is basically where people go when they get sectioned under the Mental Health Act, and they live there essentially, and we are in charge of looking after them. The forensic part of my hospital means that most of my patients either came from the prison system because their mental health deteriorated whilst they were in prison, or they came directly to the hospital because they weren't well enough to go to prison. So a lot of my patients have committed a crime and have some sort of forensic background. The particular hospital where I worked at also catered for people with learning disabilities, so in addition to the forensic background, they may have had some sort of learning difficulties as well. And that is basically the setting summed up really quickly. If I haven't explained that too well, feel free to comment down below and I'll try and explain it again as best as I can. The next little section is probably what you're all here for, and that is what was my role. And at the start I always considered myself to be a healthcare assistant. However, it gets very confusing then when you think of a healthcare assistant in a general hospital that changes the beds, escorts people to the toilets, assists the nurses, because it is a completely different role. And so my actual role is defined as a mental health support worker or a care provider or care worker. That is what we tend to use in mental health settings. So it's basically a mental health version of a healthcare assistant. However, our roles and responsibilities are very different, and I will explain a little bit more about that in a second. Before I do that, I just want to quickly mention that I did this job as part of NHS Professionals, or NHSP. It's basically a system where you can do agency work or agency style type work for your local NHS trust. So you pick your own shifts and hours and can work as much or as little as you like. You can, however, do this job permanently, either on a part-time or a full-time contract. I just chose not to do that, and I think I have wrote down a little bit further down on my list why I didn't do that, but that's basically how I got into this job. I did it through NHSP. And so what exactly did I do there? I worked on a variety of low and medium secure forensic units. I obviously wasn't limited to that hospital, as on NHSP you can work anywhere within the trust and there's lots of different sites you can work. I just chose to work at this particular hospital because that's where I fitted in the most, and that's what really called my name. My role whilst I was working on those units did vary dependent on where I worked, but as a whole it's very patient focused all day long. A typical day for me would involve doing lots of observations. So if a patient is particularly high risk, there might be 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, which is when they need a little bit of extra staff support, and so where they go, I follow them around, hence the one-to-one observation level. I also take patients on escorted leave, so we might go shopping, we could go to the cinema, we could just go for a walk around the grounds or walk around the local parks. Any leave that they are allowed to take out of the hospital, I can also facilitate that. But then at the same time, I also do a lot of ward-based activities such as arts and crafts. I've done a lot of diamond art, a lot of drawing, woodwork. However, on the units where I would work more regularly, if we were short-staffed, I would definitely do more of a paperworky based role. So I'd do the security checks in the morning and evening and make sure that everything was okay. I'd do patients' incentive plans, and I'd also use care notes to document the shift summary and any incidents throughout the day. So it really does vary. Every day is completely different. So it is a really interesting job that keeps you on your toes and always gives you something new to do each day, which I absolutely love. I hope that gives you a little bit of a better understanding as to what my role was. I'm now going to move on and talk about some of the positives of the role. Again, this is all my own opinions. Other people might feel differently, but these are the things that really stood out for me that made me love my job. I have already mentioned some of them. So for instance, choosing my own hours was one of them. If one week I only wanted to work 1 day a week, I could. If the next week I wanted to work 5 days, I also could. And so that flexibility was perfect for me, especially because I did this job coming out of uni, so I was able to slowly integrate myself into working full time, and so I did really enjoy that about my job, and I already miss it, and I'm only 3 weeks into my new one. The second positive for me is that the pay was really good. I know people often aren't very transparent online about their wages, but I'm completely okay with doing that because all you have to do is type in my role and type in NHS and you can see exactly how much I've got paid. So for NHSP, you actually work as a band 2 rather than a band 3, as if you would when you were permanent. I don't know what that pay is per year. You can definitely have a look, as I already said. But for me, if I worked a normal weekday, Monday to Friday, I would get paid £10.81 an hour, I believe. And then you get paid more for night shifts and for Saturdays, so that was like £14 something an hour. And then on Sundays it was closer to £19. And so for me to come out of uni and go to that, I was really happy with myself, because obviously it depends how much you work, as I said, but I was earning about £2,000 a month after tax some months when I really worked hard. So I do miss the pay, and the pay is very good if that's something you're looking at getting into. The third positive for me is that it was such good experience. As I've already mentioned, I'm a psychology graduate, and working in that setting allowed me to get really good clinical experience, especially if you're looking at going further in the psychology field. For instance, I may or may not be interested in doing my doctorate at some point. And the last two positives for me are the reason why I actually love the job so much. The main thing for me is that I loved working so closely with the patients and being with them for all that time in a day. You may think you get fed up of it, but you really don't. I developed such good therapeutic relationships with some of them, and because you're there for such a long time working there, it kind of became a home away from home for me. And the final positive for me is seeing the progress that those patients make, whether that was moving from a medium secure unit to a low secure unit, or just being able to manage their emotions a little bit better. It is a really rewarding job. So on top of developing those relationships with patients, it's also really nice to see progress that has been made. However, I'm going to move on to the negatives, because you can't have the good without the bad, and there was definitely aspects of the job that I didn't enjoy as much, or some that I just really hated and didn't like at all, and that's absolutely fine. For me personally, the good did outweigh the bad, but I do have quite a few on my list here, almost as many as the positive, so I'm going to get started with them. So going back to me working on NHSP, obviously one positive for me was that I got to choose my own hours. However, the negative is that you don't really receive the benefits that you get in a permanent contracted job. So I don't get any sick pay, I don't get official annual leave, and you don't get maternity pay, compassionate leave, anything you can think of like that that you get when you have a permanent contract, you don't get when you work for NHSP, which is understandable because it's not necessarily designed for people to do full time. Some people might just do 1 shift a month. Some people might do 5 days a week, and so you don't get those benefits, and that again was a reason for me leaving, which I will speak a little bit more about in a second. The second negative is probably going to be the one that you're expecting if you've clicked onto this video and have knowledge of what these settings involve, as it's the one that everybody says, and that is getting involved in incidents. So occasionally as staff we will have to restrain patients if they are a risk to themselves or to others, and this can be in a variety of different levels. It could be a really low level hold where we're just basically holding their arm and encouraging them to move away from the situation. But on the other side of the spectrum, it can be a high level hold and we can be on the floor in these positions for, you know, any amount of time that is necessary in order to de-escalate the situation. And it's not a nice thing at all. It's not something that anybody I work with enjoys, and I can probably say that for a fact. I don't think anybody has ever enjoyed a restraint, patient or staff. It's never nice to see somebody in distress, especially when you work with them most of the time and you know how they are when they're having a good day. It's sad to see them on a bad day, and you do get desensitized in some ways to those sorts of incidents. Like when I get in the car and I come home, I'm very rarely affected by them, and they can be very intense sometimes, but it's still never nice to see somebody in that situation. And it is a similar sort of situation for self-harm as well. Obviously when you're working in those sort of settings, you are going to witness patients try to self-harm or succeed in self-harming. I don't want to go into too much detail, but you do get the gist. You obviously witness some pretty traumatic things, and as I said, you do become desensitized to it, but it's never nice to see somebody go through that at all. So those two are definitely negatives of the job, which if I could take away, I would in a heartbeat. Another negative for me is staff shortages, and I'm laughing a little bit when I say this because I know everyone's probably sick of NHS staff complaining about staff shortages, but it is a real issue in any setting, but especially in an inpatient setting like this, when if you're short on staff, the risk to yourself massively escalates, and so does the risk to the patients and other patients on the unit. It is a really sticky situation. I've turned up to shifts where there's only been myself and another mental health support worker, and we've had to work without a nurse for the day, and that's happened to me numerous times. And yeah, it's such a shame, because it means that when you're short on staff, you can't provide the care that you want to provide. Patients will often miss out on doing activities or going out on their leave just because we don't have enough staff to facilitate that in a safe manner. So it is a real pain and a shame when you are short on staff. Unfortunately, it's just one of the things that comes with working in the NHS. You just have to kind of suck it up and accept it, but it is definitely a negative to the job. And after saying that I don't like it when the staff aren't there, I'm now going to say that I don't like it when some staff are there. I've often worked with staff who just don't engage with the patients all day long for the 12 hours of the day. And it does break my heart when that happens, because it's never fair on the patients to have a staff team that aren't willing to engage with them. And it obviously changes the whole mood of the unit. If you have a bad staff team on, you can tell by the mood of the patients and the mood of the staff that work there regularly. You can just tell instantly. But if you have a good staff team on, the day is completely different. It's the same when you work anywhere. If you worked in, I don't know, McDonald's, and you had people on that weren't willing to engage with the tasks as much as other people were, it brings down the whole morale of the staff. And then in my instance, it also brings down the morale of the patients. And that is probably the worst negative out of all of the ones that I've listed that really affects me the most. And I grew quite intolerant of it towards the end, because it just started upsetting me, because I care so much about what I do that when I see somebody that doesn't care as much or doesn't seem like they care as much, it really just, it got on my nerves. It really grinded my gears, as people say. But yeah, those are all of my negatives. So now you've heard the positives and the negatives. If you are interested in doing that job, you probably made your mind up now whether it's for you or not. But now you're probably wondering why I actually left the job. Why have I moved to the community mental health team when I love my mental health support worker role so much, and I still do, and I have such a passion for it? Why did I leave? Why did I quit it? The main reason for me was because I needed a permanent contract, as myself and Charlie are interested in buying a house. The reason I didn't go for a permanent contract as a support worker, because as I mentioned you can get one of those, is because when you work permanently you don't have any choice over your hours. So for me personally, I cannot work night shifts, and because I can't really negotiate that on a permanent contract, it wasn't for me. That role as a permanent member of staff doesn't suit my needs very well. I only like it when I can do it flexibly, whereas my new role in the community mental health team is 9 till 5, and that moves on to the next reason as to why I left. And that's also because Charlie is a community mental health nurse, and so she also works 9 till 5, which means that we actually get to spend all of our time together now when we're not at work. Well, not all of it, but a lot more of it, because previously I was working the weekends due to wanting the extra money, but she has all of the weekends off. So the last few months we haven't really been able to spend much time together, and that's a real shame because it means that my work-life balance isn't really that good. So that was definitely a contributing factor to me going to work 9 till 5, a massive contributing factor. Another reason for me is, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a psychology graduate. I've recently finished my Masters in Psychology in September 2021. If you're interested in watching anything related to that, whether that's vlogs or sit down chatty videos like this, have a scroll back on my channel because I documented the whole of my Masters journey, as that's kind of when I started my YouTube channel. But as a psychology graduate, it was great experience working at the hospital because it really gave me an insight into how mental health settings work and how they function. And as I said, I got to work alongside lots of other mental health care professionals. But in my day-to-day role, I didn't actually get to practice many psychological skills. And so for someone that is potentially interested in progressing in psychology, that wasn't really ideal for me. So all of those reasons combined are basically why I left the job. It wasn't because of any of the negatives that I mentioned, because as I said, for me, the good definitely outweighed the bad. And even in my new job, I have good bits and I have bad bits. And I have such a passion for working in those inpatient settings. The good news is that I haven't actually left. I only have to do 1 shift every 3 months on NHSP, so I am keeping it alongside my full-time 9 till 5, and I have already been back since and done a shift on the weekend, and I think that's really useful for me because it still allows me to develop and maintain that skill set that I've got from over there whilst acquiring a new one in my new job as well. Which kind of leads me nicely into my next section, which is would I recommend the job? 100%. As I said, I've had the best time there, and you may hear differently of other people, but as someone who really believes in patient care and enjoys developing those relationships, it was the perfect job for me. And it made me realise that I really enjoyed working on that one-to-one basis with people, and being with the patients is exactly what I wanted to do. And so moving to my new job, which is a lot more office-based, is definitely a risk for me, but it's also important for me to explore other opportunities, and it will enable me to see if going down the clinical psychology doctorate route is definitely for me. So I would definitely recommend the job to anybody that is interested. As I said earlier, if you have any more questions, feel free to pop them down below in the comment box or message me on Instagram. I'm happy to help as much as I possibly can. And so that has basically summed up my time working as a mental health support worker. I don't think I've missed anything off my list. I have checked it all. Apologies if I've come across very scripty. I really just didn't want to miss out any information that I thought was key, so I have kind of read everything off my phone. My other chatty videos are a lot more laid back, I promise. But I do hope you've enjoyed watching this, and I hope it's given you some insight as to what it was like for me working in that role. And if you're interested, I hope it's definitely encouraged you to go for it. If you've enjoyed the video, then please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe down below. Also head down to the description box and click on the link to follow me on Instagram. I'm trying to post very frequently about my days in my new job, whether that's posting my schedule or just giving any updates that I possibly can. I'm really trying to be very active over there on Instagram, in the hope that it gives you an insight as to what it's like working in the community mental health team, especially in my job as a group facilitator. But other than that, we have reached the end of the video, so I really hope you've enjoyed. I'll bring this to a close now, and I will see you all in my next one, which I believe should be another weekly vlog. Thank you for watching. Bye!